napkin was worth more than the building they were sitting in, maybe more than the entire city block. On it, scrawled in blue ink, was a sequence of 32 characters, the backbone of a digital empire. Derek Lawton, the man who owned half the tech world, tossed it onto the mahogany table and laughed. "Name your price," he sneered at the room, "if you can crack this code." The bankers and politicians looked away, terrified of looking stupid. But the waitress, the one invisible to everyone in the room, she didn't look away. She stopped pouring the Pinot Noir. She looked at the napkin, then at Lawton, and whispered 5 words that made the billionaire's blood run cold. "This isn't a story about luck. It's a story about revenge." The Obsidian Lounge sat on the 45th floor of a skyscraper that pierced the fog of lower Manhattan, a place where a glass of water cost more than most people's hourly wage. It was a sanctuary for the masters of the universe, designed in dark velvet brushed steel, and the kind of silence that money buys. Tessa Reynolds adjusted the collar of her uniform, a stiff, uncomfortable thing that smelled faintly of starch and the industrial laundry service used by the staffing agency. She was 26, but her eyes held the exhaustion of someone twice her age. To the men in this room, she was furniture. She was a tray of drinks, a refilled water glass, a cleared plate. She was noise cancellation. "It's unbreakable, Gordon. You're not listening to me." The voice boomed from the corner booth, the power table, as the staff called it. Derek Lawton sat there, legs sprawled, occupying twice the space necessary. He was the CEO of Ether Dynamics, a company that had recently secured a defense contract worth $3 billion. Lawton was 34, handsome in a predatory way, with hair swept back and a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite. He was currently 3 scotches deep into a bottle of Macallan 55. Opposite him sat Gordon Banks, a venture capitalist from Highland Partners, who looked like he was developing an ulcer in real time. "Derek, nothing is unbreakable," Banks said, his voice hushed. "The NSA has concerns. The encryption on the drone uplink. The NSA are bureaucrats using calculators from the 90s. Lawton interrupted, slamming his glass down. The ice clinked aggressively. "My algorithm isn't just encryption. It's a shifting polynomial sequence. It changes every millisecond based on background radiation noise. It is chaos harnessed. It is God's own padlock." Tessa moved in silently to refill the water glasses. She kept her eyes down, trained to be a ghost. "You're too confident," Banks pressed. "If someone cracks the seed key, the whole network goes dark. We're talking about national security, Derek." Lawton laughed, a sharp, barking sound that made the other patrons glance over nervously. He reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke Italian suit and pulled out a silver pen. He grabbed a heavy linen cocktail napkin from the table. "You want a bet, Gordon?" "Let's make a bet." "Derek, don't be an idiot," Banks hissed. Lawton ignored him. He began to write furiously on the napkin. The ink bled slightly into the fabric, but the characters were legible. A string of hexadecimals mixed with symbols that looked like Greek distinctives. He finished and slapped the napkin onto the center of the table. "That," Lawton declared, pointing a manicured finger at the cloth, "is the static root key for the prototype, the alpha build. If you can derive the prime factor from that string, you own the back door." He looked around the room, his eyes glassy and arrogant. He wasn't just talking to Banks anymore. He was performing for the room. "Hey," Lawton shouted. The room went quiet. "Anyone look at this. Name your price if you can crack this code. 1 million, 5 million. I'll write the check right now. Come on, geniuses. A few hedge fund managers chuckled nervously. A senator in the corner pretended to check his phone. No one moved. The string was nonsense to them. Complex mathematics wasn't the currency here. Influence was. Tessa was hovering by the table holding the pitcher of water. She saw the napkin. It wasn't just a string of random numbers. 0x4 F7a, followed by a series of differential equations that shouldn't have been linear. Tessa felt a strange buzzing in her ears. The world narrowed down to that white square of linen. She knew that sequence. Not the exact numbers, but the syntax, the architecture. It was the Valkyrie Protocol. Nobody, Lawton sneered, leaning back and crossing his arms. That's what I thought. You're all check writers, not thinkers. I am the smartest man in this city. Tessa stepped forward to pour water into Lawton's empty glass. Her hand didn't shake. As the water streamed clear and cold, she spoke. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a reflex born of 10 years of suppressed rage and a mind that never stopped running. You missed a variable, she said softly. The silence that followed was heavier than the lead crystal glasses on the table. Lawton froze. He slowly turned his head to look at the waitress. It was the first time he had actually seen her all night. He looked at her cheap uniform, her pulled-back brown hair, her lack of jewelry. Excuse me, Lawton asked, his voice dropping an octave. Gordon Banks looked horrified. Miss, please, just the check. Tessa didn't retreat. She set the pitcher down. She looked Lawton directly in the eyes. Her eyes were grey, sharp, and terrifyingly intelligent. The shifting polynomial sequence, Tessa said, her voice steady but quiet. It relies on atmospheric noise for entropy, right? But you wrote the static root as a closed loop. If you run that against a quantum sieving algorithm, it collapses. Lawton's smirk faltered. You're just throwing buzzwords around, sweetheart. Go get me another scotch. The prime factor is 7, Tessa said. Lawton blinked. Excuse me. The prime factor, Tessa repeated, pointing at the napkin without touching it. It's a Mersenne prime, but you modulated it with an elliptical curve. The answer isn't a number. It's a coordinate. She leaned in, slightly lowering her voice, so only Lawton could hear. And if I solve for x, the output is Cassandra. The color drained from Derek Lawton's face so fast it looked like he'd been shot. The glass of scotch in his hand tilted, spilling amber liquid over his expensive trousers, but he didn't even notice. Who are you? He whispered. Tessa picked up her tray. The mask of the waitress slid back into place. I'm just the help, sir. I'll get someone to clean up that spill. She turned and walked away, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She made it through the double doors of the kitchen before her knees gave out. She braced herself against the stainless steel counter, breathing hard. She shouldn't have done that. She had spent 5 years staying dead, and she had just walked into the lion's den and pulled his tail. Derek Lawton didn't chase her immediately. He couldn't. He was paralyzed. Derek, Gordon Banks asked, waving a hand in front of his face. What the hell was that? What is Cassandra? Lawton snatched the napkin off the table and shoved it into his pocket, his movements jerky and paranoid. We're leaving. Now! But the bill. Forget the damn bill, Lawton snapped, standing up so abruptly his chair toppled over. He strode toward the kitchen doors, ignoring the protests of the maitre d'. He burst into the bustling kitchen, startling a line cook who dropped a pan of scallops. Where is she? Lawton demanded, his eyes scanning the room. The waitress, brown hair, grey eyes. The kitchen manager, a stout man named Marco, stepped forward, wiping his hands on an apron. "Mr. Lawton, sir. Please, guests aren't allowed back here." "I don't care about your rules. Where is the girl?" Marco looked confused. "You mean Tessa?" "She just clocked out. Said she wasn't feeling well. She went out the back alley exit." Lawton ran. He burst out the rear metal door into the cold, rainy alleyway of the financial district. He looked left, then right. The alley was empty. Just steam rising from a grate and the distant sound of a siren. She was gone. Lawton pulled out his phone, his hands trembling. He didn't call the police. He didn't call security. He dialed a number that wasn't saved in his contacts. "It's Lawton," he said when the line clicked open. "I need a background check. Immediate priority. A waitress at the Obsidian Lounge. Name is Tessa. Get me everything. I want to know what she eats for breakfast. I want to know who her parents were." He paused, looking at the rain slicking the cobblestones. "I think I found a ghost." 3 miles away, Tessa sat on a plastic chair in a laundromat in Queens, watching her uniform spin in the dryer. She had discarded the SIM card from her burner phone into a sewer grate on the way to the subway. She pulled a small, battered notebook from her bag. It was filled with dense handwriting diagrams of server farms and lists of names. She turned to a fresh page and wrote "Contact made." He is more unstable than predicted. Project Aegis is vulnerable. She wasn't Tessa Reynolds. That was a name she bought from a forger in Hell's Kitchen 3 years ago. Her real name was Eliana Foster. 6 years ago, Eliana had been the brightest mind at NY2. She was 20, a prodigy in cryptography working on her PhD thesis, quantum-resistant ledger systems. She had a partner, a brilliant but ambitious young grad student named Derek Lawton. They had worked together in the basement labs, fueled by caffeine and ambition. They were going to change the world. They were going to build a system that made privacy absolute. They were also lovers. Then the fire happened. The lab explosion killed 3 people, including allegedly Eliana Foster. The official report said it was a gas leak. The university sealed the records, but it wasn't a gas leak. It was a failed test of a stolen algorithm. Derek had taken her work, her code, and tried to sell it to a private defense contractor before it was stable. When the servers overheated and the cooling system failed, causing the catastrophic explosion, Derek was the only one who had been conveniently out for coffee. Eliana had survived, burned and broken, pulled from the rubble by a firefighter before the roof collapsed. She woke up in a county hospital 2 weeks later to find that Derek Lawton was the new face of tech. He had launched Ether Dynamics using his revolutionary code, and Eliana Foster was listed as dead. She had realized then that being dead was an advantage. If Derek knew she was alive, he would finish the job. He had billions of dollars and connections to people who killed for a living. She had nothing but her mind. So she became Tessa. She worked diners, dive bars, and high-end lounges, moving every 6 months, watching him from the shadows, watching him build an empire on the ashes of her life. She had been waiting for a mistake. And tonight, blinded by arrogance and expensive scotch, he had handed her the key. Cassandra. It was the name of the routine she had written to shut the system down in case of an emergency. A kill switch. If he was using her original kernel, the kill switch was still buried deep in the code dormant, waiting for the right command. Tessa closed the notebook. The dryer buzzed. She wasn't going to run this time. Lawton knew she existed now. The clock was ticking. She had to destroy Ether Dynamics before he found her. She took her warm uniform out of the dryer. She wouldn't be going back to the Obsidian Lounge. It was time to upgrade. She walked out into the Queen's night, pulling her hood up. She needed a computer, not a library PC, and not a smartphone. She needed a rig. She headed toward a pawn shop on 31st Avenue that stayed open late. The owner, a fence named Silas. No, wait. Silas is forbidden. A fence named Rocco owed her a favor. He had a military-grade decryption deck in the back room that he didn't know how to use. It was time to go to work. The next morning, the sun rose over a city that felt different to Derek Lawton. For the first time in a decade, he felt fear. He sat in his office at the top of the ether tower. The walls were glass, offering a panoramic view of the empire he ruled, but he was staring at a tablet screen. His head of security, a former CIA operative named Victor Krell, stood stoically by the door. "We found her apartment," Krell said, his voice gravelly. "Or what's left of it. A studio in the Bronx, cleared out, no fingerprints, no hair fibers. She bleached the place before she left. Landlord knew her as Tessa Reynolds. Social security number belongs to a woman who died in a car crash in Ohio 4 years ago." Lawton rubbed his temples. "She's a pro." "She's trained," Krell corrected. "Cleaning a scene like that. That's tradecraft. Who is she, Derek? Corporate espionage, Chinese intelligence?" "Worse," Lawton muttered. "She's the past." He stood up and walked to the window. She knew the seed phrase Victor. She knew the variable Cassandra. Only 2 people in the world knew that name. "And the other one is dead," Krell said. "Is she?" Lawton turned around. "I saw the body bag, Victor. But did we ever get DNA? No. The dental records were inconclusive because of the heat." Krell narrowed his eyes. "You think Eliana Foster is alive? That was 6 years ago. If she survived, why wait until now?" "Because she's playing with me," Lawton snarled. "She wanted me to know. She stood right there, pouring my water, and laughed in my face." He slammed his hand on the desk. "I want her found. Put a bounty out. 5 million. Off the books. Check every facial recognition camera in the tri-state area. If she's Eliana, she's the only person on Earth who can dismantle Project Aegis." "If she's Eliana," Krell said slowly, "we don't just need to find her. We need to kill her." "No," Lawton said, a cruel glint returning to his eyes. "Not yet. She has the missing sequence for the quantum stability patch, the one thing I haven't been able to fix since the fire. If she's alive, she has the solution in her head." He straightened his tie. "Bring her to me. I want to hire her. And if she refuses, then we break her." While Lawton was mobilizing a private army, Eliana was sitting in the basement of Rocco's pawn shop, surrounded by the hum of server fans. The air smelled of ozone and stale pizza. Rocco, a balding man with a nervous twitch, hovered over her shoulder. Widened. "The Trojan wasn't the attack," Eliana said. "The Trojan was the distraction. It was loud. It was obvious. It was bait." She slammed the wafer down onto the surface of Lawton's desk. The desk was a smart surface, an interface connected directly to the server core. The graphene wafer bridged the connection, instantly sending a near-field induction. "This," Eliana said, "is the real attack." Click. The room plunged into darkness. The blue lights on the servers turned angry red. The monitors on the wall flickered and died, then rebooted with a single image. A white owl. The symbol of Athena. "What did you do?" Lawton screamed, smashing his glass. "I didn't target the software." Eliana's voice rang out in the dark. I targeted the hardware cooling protocols, the same ones you tampered with 6 years ago. A low rising whine filled the room, the sound of fans spinning up to maximum velocity, the sound of processors overheating. System alert, thermal critical, a robotic voice announced. Turn it off, Lawton yelled at Krell. Shoot her, Krell fired. Thwip, thwip. 2 bullets shattered the glass wall behind where Eliana had been standing. But she was already moving. In the darkness, the waitress who had learned to be invisible was in her element. She slid under the desk. You can't stop it, Derek, she shouted from cover. The core is entering thermal runaway. In 3 minutes, your $3 billion empire is going to melt into a puddle of silicon. No. Lawton scrambled for the keyboard, his face illuminated by the red emergency lights. I can override it. I have the master key. He typed furiously. Access denied. He typed again. Access denied. User Cassandra has locked the terminal. Lawton stared at the screen in horror. Cassandra, he whispered. You wanted the Cassandra variable? Eliana asked, standing up on the other side of the room, holding a heavy glass sculpture she had grabbed from a shelf. You're looking at her. Kill her, Victor, Lawton shrieked. Krell lunged at her, but the room was flashing with strobe lights now as the alarm system went haywire. Eliana swung the sculpture with all her might. It connected with Krell's wrist, knocking the gun from his hand. It skittered across the floor toward the servers. Krell tackled her. They hit the floor hard. He was stronger, heavier. His hands found her throat. Enough games, Krell grunted, squeezing. Eliana gagged, clawing at his face. The room was getting hotter. The servers were beginning to smoke. Derek, she choked out. The halon system. If you don't trigger the fire suppression, the building will burn. Lawton wasn't listening. He was staring at his life's work, watching the temperature gauges climb into the red. He was paralyzed by the choice, save the building or try to save the code. Eliana's vision was blurring. Krell's grip was like a vice. She reached out her hand, scrabbling on the floor. Her fingers brushed against something cold and metal. The gun. She gripped it. She didn't have the angle to shoot Krell, so she shot the server rack next to them. Bang! A coolant pipe burst. A jet of freezing liquid nitrogen sprayed out, hitting Krell in the face. He screamed, releasing her, and rolling away, clutching his eyes. Eliana gasped for air, scrambling backward. She raised the gun, pointing it at Krell, then at Lawton. It's over, Derek, she rasped. Let it burn. Lawton looked at her, then at the smoking servers. The heat was intense now. The smell of burning plastic filled the air. You destroyed it, he whispered, tears of rage in his eyes. You destroyed everything. I fixed it, Eliana said. Suddenly the door blew open. It wasn't the police. It wasn't security. It was General Bishop and his detail of military police. They had come up when the screens in the ballroom went black. Mr. Lawton, the general barked, seeing the gun in Eliana's hand and the smoking ruins of the servers. What is the meaning of this? Lawton looked at the general. He looked at Eliana. If he blamed Eliana, he had to admit his security was breached, his code was flawed, and his system was vulnerable. He would lose the contract. He would be ruined. If he lied, maybe he could salvage something. Lawton straightened his jacket. He looked at Eliana with pure hatred. It was a stress test, General. Lawton lied, his voice shaking. A live fire exercise. And this consultant, Just proved that our physical security needs upgrading. He stared at Eliana. Get out. Eliana lowered the gun. She realized what he was doing. He was letting her go to save his own reputation. He couldn't admit a waitress had beaten him. I quit, Eliana said. She dropped the gun on the floor. General. She nodded to the confused military men. I'd recommend checking the server logs for the last 6 years. You'll find some interesting reading before they melt. She walked past them out the door and toward the stairwell. She didn't look back. Eliana walked out of the Grand Metropole Hotel, through the kitchen exit, bypassing the chaos of the lobby. Fire trucks were already screaming down Fifth Avenue, their sirens cutting through the cool night air. She stripped off the diamond earrings and shoved them into her pocket. She kicked off her high heels and walked barefoot on the cold pavement until she found a subway grate that was warm with steam. She didn't run. She walked. She was just another woman in the city, invisible again. Back in the penthouse, the halon gas had deployed, sucking the oxygen out of the room to kill the fire. Derek Lawton stood in the hallway, coughing, his eyes watering. General Bishop was shouting orders into a phone. Victor Krell was being treated by a paramedic for frostbite on his face, groaning in agony. Lawton leaned against the wall, trying to compose himself. He was shaking, but his mind was already spinning, calculating the damage control. The hardware is toast, he thought. But the off-site backups, I can restore the build from the Zurich servers. It will take a month, maybe 2. I'll tell the investors it was a sabotage attempt by a foreign rival. I can spin this. I can survive this. He looked at General Bishop. General, I apologize for the interruption. As you can see, our competitors are desperate. But the data is safe. Aegis is safe. General Bishop lowered his phone. He turned to look at Lawton. The general's face was no longer confused. It was stone cold. Safe? Bishop asked. Yes, sir. The core melted, but the code exists in the cloud. We can rebuild. Mr. Lawton, the general said, his voice dangerously quiet. My aide just sent me a link. It's trending on every platform. Twitter, Reddit, even the dark web news feeds. Lawton frowned. What are you talking about? The general held up his tablet. On the screen was a video. It wasn't a video of the party. It was a screen recording. A scrolling wall of text and audio files. The header read, "The Valkyrie Archives Murder Theft and the True Source of Ether Dynamics." Lawton felt the blood drain from his legs. She didn't just melt your servers, Lawton, the general said, stepping closer. She didn't just destroy the hardware. She broadcasted the root directory. Lawton grabbed the tablet. He scrolled frantically. There it was. Everything. The original time-stamped logs from MIT 6 years ago, proving Eliana Foster wrote the code. The email threads between Lawton and the cooling system contractors, ordering the safety overrides that caused the explosion. The falsified death certificate. The illegal surveillance logs of 3 U.S. senators that Aegis had been collecting for blackmail. It was all there. Public. Downloadable. Irreversible. She lied, Lawton whispered. She said she was targeting the cooling system. She did, the general said, signaling to 2 military police officers. But she used the heat spike as a carrier wave to push the data out before the system died. A dead man's switch. The officers stepped forward, taking Lawton by the arms. Derek Lawton, the general said, you are being detained under the Espionage Act and for suspicion of first-degree murder. You can't do this! Lawton screamed as they dragged him toward the elevators. I am a defense contractor. I own this city. It's a lie. It's all a lie. The guests in the lobby watched in stunned silence as the billionaire, disheveled and covered in soot, was hauled away in handcuffs. 3 days later. The news cycle was relentless. Ether Dynamics stock had plummeted to zero. The SEC had frozen the assets. Derek Lawton was being held without bail at a federal detention center. Eliana sat in a small cafe in a terminal at JFK International Airport. She was wearing jeans, a hoodie, and glasses. She looked like a college student heading home for the semester. She watched the news on the TV mounted above the bar. They were showing Lawton's mugshot. He looked small, ordinary. The bartender placed a coffee in front of her. "Can you believe that guy?" the bartender asked, gesturing to the TV with a rag. "Had billions, threw it all away because he got greedy." Eliana took a sip of the coffee. It was cheap, bitter, and burnt. It was the best coffee she had ever tasted. "Yeah," Eliana said. "Greed makes you blind." "They say a whistleblower took him down," the bartender continued, leaning on the counter. "Some hacker. They still don't know who it was. Probably some guy in a basement in Russia, right?" Eliana smiled. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled, stained cocktail napkin. The linen was stiff with dried ink. 0x4F7A. She looked at the sequence one last time. The code that had started the war. The code Derek had arrogantly thrown on a table, assuming no one, little, could understand it. She took out a lighter. "Hey, no smoking in here," the bartender warned. "I'm not smoking," Eliana said. She held the flame to the corner of the napkin. The fire caught the linen. She held it over the empty ashtray, watching the blue ink turn to black ash, watching the formula curl and disappear. "Just cleaning up some trash," she said. She dropped the burning napkin into the tray and watched it turn to dust. "You going somewhere nice?" the bartender asked. "Zurich." Eliana lied. She was actually going to Lisbon. "I hear the weather is nice this time of year." "Must be nice," the bartender sighed. "I'm stuck here double shifting, waiting on tables." Eliana stood up, slinging her bag over her shoulder. She looked the bartender in the eye. Really looked at him, acknowledging his existence, his fatigue, his humanity. "Hang in there," Eliana said. She pulled a stack of cash from her pocket, the remainder of the money she'd taken from the safety deposit box. It was $2,000. She tucked it under her coffee cup. "Keep the change." The bartender's eyes widened. "Miss, I can't—" "Take it," Eliana said, turning toward the gate. "And remember, never underestimate the person pouring your water." She walked away, merging into the crowd of travelers. She wasn't Eliana Foster anymore. She wasn't Tessa Reynolds. She was a blank slate. A ghost in the machine. Derek Lawton had named his price, and she had collected it. The downfall of Derek Lawton wasn't caused by a rival corporation or a foreign government. It was caused by the inability to see the value in the people he deemed beneath him. He looked at a waitress and saw a servant. He never bothered to look close enough to see the architect of his own empire. In a world obsessed with status titles and net worth, the most dangerous variable is often the one standing quietly in the corner. Intelligence doesn't wear a uniform, and justice doesn't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes it comes on a cocktail napkin, delivered by the invisible hand that cleans up the mess. And that is how a single cocktail napkin brought down a $3 billion empire. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many times have we walked past, someone ignored them or underestimated them, not realizing they held the keys to the castle? I want to know what you would have done. If Derek Lawton threw that napkin on the table in front of you and offered $1 million to solve it, Would you have taken the money and stayed quiet? Or would you have done what Eliana did and burned his world to the ground? Let me know in the comments below, money or revenge? If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories about underdogs who bite back, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. You don't want to miss next week's story. Thanks for watching, and remember, pay attention to everyone. You never know who's listening.